All right, let's talk about cholesterol. Seriously, is there any topic in health that causes more confusion, more of an emotional uproar? You've probably wondered about it yourself, right? Maybe you're looking at a lab report, totally confused, or you're just walking through the grocery store getting hit with all these conflicting claims. One minute you hear it's a villain that's going to clog your arteries for sure, and the next you hear it's this totally harmless molecule that's just been misunderstood. So today, we're going to cut through all of that noise. We're going to find a clear answer to this one really important question. And it's no wonder we're all so confused. I mean, you see it on social media, you see it in news headlines, you hear it from your family. Everybody seems to have a really strong opinion, and most of the time, they're completely different. It's become this totally polarized debate. On one side, you've got the it's a killer camp. They say high cholesterol is basically a one-way ticket to a heart attack. Then, on the other side, you have the it's a myth camp, claiming it's an essential molecule that's been unfairly demonized. But the truth, as it so often is, isn't really found at either of those extremes. The real story is so much more nuanced, and you know what? It's way more interesting. So, to really get what's going on, we have to just ignore that debate for a second and start with how cholesterol actually works inside your body. And here is the first major plot twist, which might actually surprise you. Before we can even talk about cholesterol as a risk factor, we have to give it credit for being an unsung hero. That's right, a hero. Let me put it this way. Without cholesterol, you would not be alive. It's that fundamental. It is the building block for the outer layer of every single cell in your body. It's crucial for your nerve pathways, and it's the raw material for making essential hormones like testosterone and estrogen, not to mention vitamin D. It is absolutely 100% essential for survival. Okay, so if it's so vital, how does it become a problem? Well, the issue isn't what it is, it's how it gets around. See, cholesterol is a fatty, kind of waxy substance. And your blood, well, it's mostly water. Oil and water, right? They don't mix. So to solve this, your body is brilliant. It packages the cholesterol into something called a lipoprotein, which basically acts like a tiny cargo ship, letting it sail through the bloodstream. And that right there, that's the key to this whole thing. The problem is not the cholesterol itself. That's just the cargo. The problem is the ship it travels in, and more importantly, how many of those ships are floating around in your bloodstream. So let's meet the main character of our story, apolipoprotein B, or ApoB for short. This is the specific type of cargo ship that can get you into trouble. It's the particle that has the unique ability to wiggle its way into the lining of your arteries, get stuck, and kickstart that whole process of plaque buildup. So the key takeaway here is this. It's the number of these ApoB-carrying ships that really drives the risk. Okay, so we've identified the culprit, too many of these ApoB cargo ships. But how does that actually lead to a heart attack? Let's walk through the step-by-step process of how plaque actually builds up in the first place. This isn't an overnight thing. It's a slow, silent cascade of events that happens over decades. So first, an ApoB particle slips through the inner lining of an artery, and it gets trapped. Your body sees this trapped particle as a foreign invader, and boom, it mounts an immune response. Immune cells rush to the scene, and they start gobbling up these particles, turning into what are called FUM cells. Over many, many years, these form fatty streaks, which can grow into plaques that either slowly clog the artery or, and this is the really dangerous part, they can rupture and cause a sudden, catastrophic blockage. This brings us to the single most important equation in this entire explainer. Your risk is a function of two things: the number of ApoB particles you have, multiplied by the amount of time you are exposed to them. So it's not just about how high your number is, it's about how high it is and for how long. Now, that's a really powerful idea, right? But is it just a theory? Or is there actual data to back this up? Let's take a look at the evidence, because honestly, it is impossible to ignore. But that raises a pretty obvious question, doesn't it? This whole process takes decades to develop. You can't just run a clinical trial for 50 or 60 years. So how could scientists possibly figure out the effects of lifelong exposure? Well, incredibly, nature has already run the experiment for us. There's this amazing scientific method called Mendelian randomization. You see, the genes you're born with are basically assigned at random. So we can study huge groups of people who have genetic variations that just naturally give them lower cholesterol from birth. And then we can compare their outcomes to everyone else. It's like nature's own perfect clinical trial. Okay, Now, this graph might look a little complicated, but the story it tells is actually really simple and incredibly powerful. Just follow me here. The bottom axis is how much cholesterol is lowered. The side axis is how much heart disease risk goes down. See that lower red line? That's the benefit you see in short-term drug trials, maybe 5 years long. But now look at that steep blue line. That line represents people with genetically lower cholesterol from birth. For the exact same drop in cholesterol, their lifelong exposure gives them a massively bigger benefit. That huge gap between the lines, that's the power of time. This leads to a fantastic analogy. Lowering your ApoB particles is a lot like investing your money. The real power, the magic, comes from starting early and just letting the benefits compound over a lifetime. Time in the system matters so much more than trying to time the system. Even a small advantage, held for decades, has a massive impact down the road. All right, so the data is pretty clear. But what about all those counter-arguments? The yeah, but questions we always hear. Let's tackle the most common ones, rapid-fire style. This is the classic, right? We've all heard it. My grandpa's cousin smoked every single day, ate bacon and eggs for breakfast, had sky-high cholesterol, and lived to be 102. So how is that even possible? Simple. That person is an outlier. They are the exception, not the rule. When we talk about risk, what we're really doing is playing a game of probability. And yeah, there will always be exceptions who seem to beat the odds. But the data from millions and millions of people is crystal clear. Higher ApoB exposure dramatically increases your risk. Betting your life on being that 1 in a million outlier, that's a very, very risky gamble. Okay, this is another really important one that confuses a lot of people. If high cholesterol is the big problem, why do we see so many people whose lab reports say their levels are normal and they still have a heart attack? The reason is that normal on a lab test usually just means average. And here's the kicker. Average risk in our society is still pretty high. The science shows us that plaque can keep building up even at levels your doctor might call normal. Optimal risk is much, much lower than average risk. So let's bring it all home. Let's boil it down to 4 crucial points to remember. Number 1, cholesterol itself isn't the villain. It's absolutely essential for you to live. 2, the real danger comes from the number of those ApoB cargo ships. 3, your total risk is that number of ships multiplied by time. And 4, because of that time factor, doing something about it early has a massive compounding effect on your long-term health. Look, you can't change the genes you were dealt at birth. That hand is set. But you have decades, literally decades, to influence the time variable in that risk equation. So the final question isn't for me, it's for you to think about. When it comes to your health, are you playing the short game or are you playing the long game?